On February 12, 1969, Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate signed the lease at Cielo. The newlyweds moved in 3 days later. Their rent was $1,200 a month. 10050 Cielo Drive was a 3-acre property in Benedict Canyon, a luxury neighborhood in the Hollywood Hills, zip-coded Bel Air. Built in 1942 by architect Robert Birch, a pioneer of the California indoor-outdoor home, typified by beamed ceilings, Dutch doors, and rustic details, the house was constructed for French actress Michelle Morgan. The living room featured a stone fireplace and half loft. There was a swimming pool and guest house just past the master bedroom. 10050 sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, bordered by thick pines and flowering cherry trees. It was the kind of lush California canyon terrain where you could look out, but few of your neighbors could see in. It also boasts perhaps the greatest vantage point in all of Los Angeles. It overlooks the entire Hollywood Bowl, as this author can attest from a recent visit. But in 1942, this was an upscale new housing settlement and not worth the tens of millions or more it can sell for in today's market. Morgan was fleeing the Nazi invasion when she came to America, but she found little success in Hollywood and considered the Cielo home haunted, claiming she heard voices in the living room. 4 years after the house was built, Morgan returned to France, and film pioneer Lillian Gish and her mother moved to the estate. The house was then sold to a doctor who lived there during most of the 1950s. In the early 60s, the house was purchased by Rudy Altobelli, a talent manager. He then occasionally rented the residence to several well-known stars, including Henry Fonda. In 1965, Cary Grant and Diane Cannon honeymooned there. When the main house was rented, Altobelli would occasionally stay in the guest house, sometimes known as the caretaker's cottage, and he kenneled his dogs at the property. Terry Melcher leased Cielo Drive from Altobelli in early '68, moving in with talent manager Roger Hart. When Roger moved out a few months later, singer Mark Lindsay of Paul Revere and the Raiders came to stay. And when Melcher began dating Candice Bergen, Lindsay eventually moved out. Roman and Sharon were married the previous January in Chelsea, London, after meeting on the set of The Fearless Vampire Killers. Writer-director Polanski was the enfant terrible of new European cinema. His films Knife in the Water, Repulsion, and Cul-de-sac had established him as the auteur of modern suspense. His fourth feature film, Rosemary's Baby, released June 1968, propelled him into cinematic superstardom. Born in Paris in 1933, Roman is a Holocaust survivor. The son of Polish parents, a Jewish father and a half-Jewish mother who was raised Roman Catholic, he also had an older half-sister, Annette. The family moved back to Poland when Roman was 2 years old. The Nazis invaded 3 years later. Roman's father, a painter and sculptor, changed his surname from Liebling to Polanski, a less Semitic name. The name change would not permit them, however, to escape persecution. The Polanski family was herded with other Jews into a squalid ghetto in Krakow. Author Thomas Keneally, Schindler's List, wrote, Roman's response to the occupying power was that if only one could explain to them that we had done nothing wrong, the Germans would realize that it was all a gigantic misunderstanding. His mother had to tell him the meaning of the star he wore on his arm. Roman's father was later sent to the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. His mother and Annette were both sent to Auschwitz. Annette survived, but their mother Beulah was murdered shortly after her arrival at the notorious death camp. She was 4 months pregnant with her third child at the time of her extermination. Roman recalled seeing his father rounded up by the Nazis. I ran over to him, but he chased me away and said, "Go away, go away." I knew he was trying to save my life. I instinctively wanted to cling to my father. I would have used every possible excuse to stay with him. A child is an optimist by nature. He believes that everything will end well. but I knew what was at stake. Death was lurking for you at the time, so I ran away. That was how my father saved my life." Roman lived by his wits while the rest of his family were in hell. He escaped the ghetto in '43, fleeing into the Polish countryside. There he found a few brave families, mostly peasants, willing to give him shelter. On several occasions, the boy was forced to pretend to be Catholic to protect himself. Finally, after the war was over, he was reunited with his father Rizard. Roman's tragic and frightening childhood provided fodder for his films. Knife in the Water, his first full-length movie, is about a young couple who pick up a hitchhiker and bring him sailing. There are shades of violence, tense competition, and duplicity in the film, which won an Oscar and a BAFTA, the British version of the Academy Awards, in 1964. Repulsion, his second feature film, is about a frigid woman, Catherine Deneuve, suffering terrifying hallucinations about sexual violence. Although neither of these films are about the Holocaust, Polanski didn't tackle that sensitive and familiar subject until 2002's The Pianist. They do show the marks of sexual obsession, alpha male rivalries, and a preoccupation with blood, terror, and death. Polanski, despite his childhood tragedies, had become a rather mercurial and mirthful young man by the time his films were being internationally recognized. When he met Sharon Tate in autumn of 1965, he was a gay divorcee. His first marriage to Polish actress Barbara Kwiatkowska ended 4 years before. Short, almost elfin, with a prominent nose and lush dark hair worn in a mod 60s style, Roman was very much the man about town. He had an affinity for tall, slender blondes. Sharon Marie Tate may have donned a red wig for her role in the vampire farce where the two met, but she otherwise met Polanski's tastes to a T. Born January 24, 1943, in Dallas, Texas, she was a stunner from the moment she entered the world. Her father, Paul, was a United States Army major, and her mother, Doris, a homemaker. Sharon was entered in her first beauty pageant at 6 months old. She won Miss Tiny Tot of Dallas and later pageants as a teen. 2 other daughters were born to the Tate family, Deborah in 1952 and Patricia in '57. With a 9-year age difference between herself and her next youngest sibling, Sharon grew up feeling like an only child. She was adventurous, a bit of a tomboy, but shy. As a military brat, she lived in at least 6 different U.S. cities before the age of 16 and had difficulty making friends. Some claimed that the teen was aloof or unfriendly, but she was just introverted. Sharon's personality was equal parts her mother and father. Doris was warm and affectionate. Paul was stoic, even brooding. In 1959, Major Tate was transferred to Verona, Italy, where his family joined him at the U.S. military base. Sharon took to the European lifestyle, becoming confident and more comfortable in her own skin. She was quite popular at her American high school. She and her friends often headed off on ski trips to the Alps. Sharon was crowned homecoming queen and senior prom queen. Sadly, she was also the victim of what we now call date rape, just after graduation. She told few people about the assault, believing it would bring shame to her family. Sharon considered becoming a psychiatrist, but in 1961, when the film production of Adventures of a Young Man came to Verona, she had a chance meeting with lead actor Richard Beymer. Beymer, who just starred in West Side Story, glimpsed the fair-haired beauty in the crowd and called her over. The two began dating, and Beymer encouraged his girlfriend to consider a film career. I mean, with her looks, why not? She got her first break, an uncredited role in the film Barabbas, filmed in Verona with Anthony Quinn and Jack Palance. Palance was impressed with Sharon's stunning looks and charm. He encouraged her to take a screen test in Rome. That fell through, but undaunted, the 19-year-old moved to California in February of '62 in hopes of making it as an actress. She tried for months to secure work but was unsuccessful and returned to Italy. Her mother, worried for her daughter, had stressed herself into a nervous breakdown. Paul Tate then received a promotion to colonel and was reassigned to Fort MacArthur in San Pedro, just across the bay from Terminal Island where Manson had been imprisoned. The entire family moved to the West Coast. There, Sharon resumed her pursuit of an acting career. She got her next break when she signed a 7-year contract with producer Martin Ransohoff. Ransohoff began his career directing commercials, eventually producing a number of popular sitcoms, including the Beverly Hillbillies. Sharon's deal with Martin gave the producer more than it gave her. She could only work on his projects. She was relegated to bit parts in Petticoat Junction, Mr. Ed, and Beverly Hillbillies, wearing a short black wig that hid her honey blonde locks. Ransohoff allegedly spent up to $100,000 helping Sharon improve her acting skills, as well as signing her up for singing, dancing, and fitness classes. After 2 years, Sharon wanted more than the middling television fare she was receiving and hounded Ransohoff for better opportunities. He claimed he was reserving her for something special, and she needed to wait. Sharon, however, was impatient. She was dating a French actor, Philippe Fouquet, and their relationship was not going well. He was abusive, and they were together a year before breaking it off, Fouquet returning to Paris. In November 1964, Sharon met Jay Sebring, a stylist specializing in men's hair care. Jay learned about the beautiful actress from a friend and began pursuing her. They started dating, and Jay soon proposed, but Sharon wasn't ready for marriage. She wanted to wait until she was established as an actress. In fact, her contract specifically forbade marriage until the 7th year. Jay Sebring was born Thomas John Kummer in October 1933 in Birmingham, Alabama. One of 4 children born to a quiet accountant and his wife, the family relocated to the suburbs of Detroit when Jay was a child. There, the boy grew fond of cars and racing. After high school, he joined the Navy and served 4 years, including the Korean War conflict. Following his service, he moved to Los Angeles and changed his name. Sebring was homage to the racing circuit. In LA, Jay enrolled in beauty school. He became a licensed stylist and opened his first shop on Fairfax in Hollywood. Jay Sebring was not just a barber or even a men's hairdresser. He actually invented a new way to style men's hair architecture for men, he called it, and began to attract the most fashionable young males in Southern California. His shop had dark wood paneling and lush exotic plants everywhere. The sign was a bold red ankh, the Egyptian symbol for life, and Sebring's shop was one of the first in the nation to use handheld dryers, a recent European invention. Clients were shampooed, cut, dried, and styled so their hair took on an edgy, fashion-forward look. Prices were comparable with top-end women's stylists. Soon, the stars began to drop in. Henry Fonda would be there when I went in. There'd be starlets shampooing hair. It was the hottest place in Hollywood in the afternoon. There was gossip, coffee, pretty girls, and the haircuts were damned good, reminisced Joe Hyams, former West Coast bureau chief for the New York Herald Tribune. Sebring hired the best hairdressers, quickly earning a reputation as the stylist to the stars, at least the ones with testosterone. He studied martial arts with Bruce Lee, raced sports cars with Paul Newman, and was the only man to touch the hair of superstar Steve McQueen. It was also Sebring who gave the Lizard King, Jim Morrison of the Doors, his signature Alexander the Great-inspired cut in 1967. Sebring even bought himself a movie star home in Beverly Hills. 9860 Easton Drive was a Bavarian-inspired 2-story mansion boasting a grand wooden staircase and gutter spouts carved in the likenesses of silent screen legends Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and Rudolph Valentino. Sebring bought the 3-bedroom home in 1963 as his star was rising. The house, built in 1927, was the honeymoon home of film bombshell Jean Harlow and her husband, German-born screenwriter Paul Bern. Harlow and Bern married in July 1932. 2 months later, Bern was dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound at their beautiful estate. At least 3 more people died at the property over the next few decades, including a drowning and other suicides. Some say the property is haunted. It has been renumbered in recent years to keep the looky-loos away. On one overnight stay, Sharon Tate woke during the night to see the appearance of a strange small man at the foot of her bed. She raced down the hall to the stairway where she saw another apparition, a man with his throat slashed. Disoriented, she went back to bed, convinced she had just had a bad dream. Sharon and Jay were very close, spending much time together, including at his salon. She even learned to cut hair. She also apparently indulged Jay in his predilection for sadomasochism during sex. Jay was known as a very kinky bondage guy, but Sharon loved him, and there are no indications that she either gave in to his whims without question or argued with Jay about their sex life. And since his death, with Sharon, none of his lovers came forth to claim he ever harmed or humiliated them. He just had a few kinks, but who doesn't? In 1965, Sharon auditioned for roles in 2 high-profile films, The Cincinnati Kid with Steve McQueen, and the role of Liesl in The Sound of Music. She was not hired for either film, told her acting talents were not yet to the level they needed to be taken seriously. But finally, Ransohoff secured a project for his anxious client, 1966's The Eye of the Devil. For the role, Sharon traveled to France and England. Her co-stars were David Niven and Kim Novak, but when Novak suffered a back injury during filming, she was replaced with Deborah Carr. The movie is about a married couple who return to their vineyard, only to be confronted by a witch, played by Tate, and her equally diabolical brother. A Wiccan expert was brought in to school the writers and cast. Some people claimed after her death that Sharon was initiated into witchcraft by this expert, but that's a bunch of hogwash. She was merely educating herself to convey the emotions and dialogue as the script dictated. Sharon identified as Catholic, the religion she grew up with. She was an open-minded woman in the liberal 60s and no longer regularly attended Mass, but when she later learned she was pregnant, she told Roman and her family that she planned to have the baby christened in the Catholic Church. That's not to say that she wasn't spiritually curious. Sharon read books about Buddhism and Hinduism and New Age practices, but never renounced her faith. Her Catholic roots were perhaps the reason why she could not enjoy an open marriage when she found herself in one. During filming of Eye of the Devil, Sharon met Life magazine photographer Shiro Hatami. Hatami took the majority of Sharon's professional portraits for the rest of her life and became a dear friend. He was also present at Cielo Drive, the day that Manson was seen by his family's most famous murder victim, months before she was killed at his command. Sharon's next role again took her to Europe for filming and would dramatically change her life. Ransohoff was producing The Fearless Vampire Killers with quite the cinematic get. Recent Academy Award winner Roman Polanski had signed on to direct and co-star. Fearless filmed in England and Italy during the fall of 1966. It's a rather silly, blood-sucking romp, but it is how Roman and Sharon met. Sharon, still dating Sebring, traveled to London for early shoots. She was excited about the film because her hunch told her that she might be most talented at comedy. She saw herself in the same vein as Carole Lombard, beautiful but with a stellar wit. It's tragic that her film career ended so abruptly because she was likely correct about where her greatest opportunities might lie. When Sharon was introduced to the diminutive but amusing Polish director, it was not love at first sight. Nor was Polanski impressed with her acting talents, claiming it took 70 takes to get a decent scene out of her. However, Roman was taken with her beauty. He pursued her aggressively, although he was dating actress Jill St. John at the time. Finally, Sharon agreed to spend time with her director one afternoon. The two dropped acid at her hotel room, had sex, and then fell in love. Sharon then had to make the difficult call back to the States to break things off with Jay. He more than took it in stride. He accepted her decision with grace and dignity. He told her they would remain friends, and they did. He even became friends with Roman, which couldn't have been easy. Roman did not have the sexual peccadillos that Jay had, but he came with his own baggage nonetheless. Roman, simply put, was a player. He had multiple sexual partners during most of his adulthood, and nothing, even falling head over heels in love with his leading lady, was going to change him. I have no doubt that he wanted to be true to Sharon, but he knew who he was, and he explained to his girlfriend that he required multiple lovers. Roman had an attraction to many different types of women. One of those desires would later put him on the run from the law. Sharon tried to be a modern woman. She allegedly had at least one affair after she and Roman were married, and at no time did she put her foot down with her husband about his philandering, but she was deeply uncomfortable with the infidelity. Sexual mores of the time may have led many Americans to open up, to experiment, be less rigid and repressed about their lifestyle. But in the end, Sharon just wanted a traditional relationship. Early in their romance, Sharon left Roman to honor a film commitment in Los Angeles, set up through Ransohoff. She filmed the beach comedy Don't Make Waves with Tony Curtis. Sharon's character, Malibu, was exactly the kind of ding-a-ling beach bimbo that she didn't want to play. She wore a bikini in nearly all of her scenes to give some perspective. She was embarrassed by the picture, which did poorly at the box office, and she remarked to more than one person that it was a shit film. Meanwhile, during filming, she was dealing with Roman's many indiscretions. She often turned to Jay in solace. Sharon's next movie would posthumously become her cinematic landmark, which is a shame. Based upon the popular pulp novel, Valley of the Dolls was another box office dud, despite the talented stars on the marquee. Patty Duke, Barbara Parkins, Lee Grant, and Sharon. None of these beautiful, talented women could save this campy catastrophe. Sharon's character, Jennifer, is so vain and desperate to be loved that she'd rather kill herself than fight breast cancer. Granted, 1967's medical advances were far behind ours today, and many women then did die of breast cancers. But the cheesy script, based on Jacqueline Suzanne's bestseller, was literally laughed at in theaters across the nation. 1967 should have been Sharon's year. Instead, it was Roman's. That March, Roman began shooting Rosemary's Baby in New York City, featuring winsome young actress Mia Farrow, then married to Frank Sinatra, along with actor and filmmaker John Cassavetes and stage and screen star Ruth Gordon. This film adaptation had all the right ingredients. It went on to win several awards, including an Oscar for Gordon in her role as nosy neighbor Minnie. Rosemary's Baby was exactly what Americans were eating up. Good, interesting horror flicks that tapped into our primal fears. This film really put Roman on the map in Hollywood. If he hadn't agreed to make Rosemary's Baby, Polanski today would simply be known professionally as an interesting European auteur. Roman actually considered casting Sharon as the young wife and mother-to-be Rosemary, but producers, including Hollywood legend Robert Evans, chose Farrow just off the success of the series Peyton Place. Despite her misgivings about Roman's infidelities, Sharon agreed to marry the Playboy director. Their wedding, held in London on January 20th, 1968, was attended by many celebrities, including Joan Collins and Michael Caine. The Polanskis spent the next week in London, followed by a skiing trip in the Alps. By February 1968, the newlyweds were in Los Angeles, in a bungalow at the Chateau Marmont. Sharon spent that spring trying to extricate herself from Ransohoff's contract. Gossip columnist Sheila Graham wrote, "I bet that if she asked in a nice way for her release, she'd get it. The producers spent 2 years building Sharon to the point where she could act. One of the provisos was that she would not marry for several years. You can fight everyone except Cupid." That June, Sharon and Roman joined director John Frankenheimer, the Manchurian Candidate, at his Malibu home to welcome presidential candidate Robert Kennedy and his wife Ethel. Sharon was an enthusiastic supporter of the former Attorney General. The following night, Kennedy was assassinated in the kitchen of the Ambassador Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Less than a week after RFK's death, Rosemary's Baby was released in theaters to critical acclaim and box office success. Roman and Sharon moved that month into a house on Summit Ridge Drive, owned by her Valley co-star, Patty Duke. They stayed there for the next 7 months. Roman may have had an eye for other women, but he was deeply in love with his wife. She had promised to never demand that he change for her, but her gentility and kindness certainly had an impact upon him. She never had a bad temper. She was never moody, he insisted. She enjoyed being a wife. The press and the public knew of her physical beauty, but she also had a beautiful soul. That summer, Sharon began filming a new comedy, The Wrecking Crew, with Dean Martin and Alki Summer. She played Freya Carlson, a clumsy tour guide assigned to help Martin's super spy character. There wasn't much to the script or her role, but true to form, Sharon added a whimsy and comedic charm to her performance, and there were some spectacular martial arts sequences, choreographed by Bruce Lee. But again, Sharon's talents and determination seemed to go for naught. The film was panned. Sharon learned that she was expecting just before she and Roman moved to Cielo Drive. A year into her marriage, despite her agreement not to try to change her husband, she was struggling. Allegedly, she found a home movie of Roman and another woman having sex in their marital bed. She considered ending the marriage at that time, but when she discovered she was expecting, thinking the news would change her husband, she told Roman. His response was apoplectic. A friend of Polanski's later explained Roman's reluctance to have kids. Novelist Jerzy Kosinski, a fellow Holocaust survivor, told a reporter, "When I heard that Polanski was going to marry Sharon, I was not surprised. But I was truly surprised when I heard that Polanski was going to have a baby. Anyone with our background would be very apprehensive over anything lasting too long, including ourselves." Sharon then called Jay Sebring, who listened as she talked about the state of her marriage. She told Jay that Roman had encouraged her to have an abortion. When she refused, he had a very public affair with Michelle Phillips and the Mamas and the Papas, a good friend of Sharon's. Sharon asked Jay if she should have an abortion and leave her husband. Jay supported Sharon, who ultimately chose to keep the baby and remain with Roman. Sadly, the last year of her life, Roman treated her abysmally, taunting her lack of talent and allegedly calling her a dumb hag. This was the situation that Sharon Tate was in at the start of 1969, pregnant, deeply in love with a man who would not be faithful to her, and settling into a new home. Sharon pinned her hopes on her coming baby and on 10050 Cielo Drive. This peaceful, beautiful place was a nice distraction from her personal woes.